The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Shearer and Owen.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then. What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Now you're very welcome along to the Football Show. Later on we'll check in with Paddy Agnew. He's over in Italy as they prepare to reopen their doors both to tourists and to restart football, which is good news. In the meantime though, always a very welcome and regular guest, Miguel Delaney, whose work you'll read in the London Independent, is standing by. Miguel, how you doing?
Not too bad.
Great to have you with us. Adapted, yeah. If you had told either of us, I suspect, on the 25th of May that coronavirus would be a very distant second in the news feed at the moment, I think we'd both have been fairly amazed, as would much of the world. And yet here we are. It's very difficult to take your eyes off America just now. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, completely. And it's having a massive influence on, well, not a massive influence, but it's permeating into sport as well, given it's obviously captured the attention of so many players and so many Premier League clubs. Given, I think it's now half them that have actually issued some sort of statement on it, which feels in itself almost unprecedented, given in most cases clubs try to stay as apolitical as possible. But this, I mean, as the head of the Kick It Out said, 2 days ago to The Guardian, this story really goes beyond politics. There's a proper human dimension to it, and it warrants a change in stance in football.
Yes, we had Dr. Harry Edwards on yesterday, who's been working in this whole area since the 60s and was part of the movement which led to the Black Power Salute, and he's a friend and mentor of Colin Kaepernick. And he describes Kaepernick, for instance, as part of the fourth wave of sports activists. And frankly, one of the primary things which separates the fourth wave and the third wave is social media. They are their own companies, effectively, their own media companies. They can reach millions of people with a simple tweet. And we're seeing that in the world of football as well. So the corporate side of things, i.e. the teams, but also a lot of the players are making statements. Marcus Rashford, for instance, made, you suspect, a very heartfelt one that he was grappling with for a few days and beyond. This is not just an American story now, it's very much a football player story.
Yeah, totally. And also, I suppose, I think Jonathan Liu touched on this in his piece yesterday, but I mean, this is more as regards clubs rather than the players, of course, but it touches on the immense power that clubs have through that social media, where they have this direct line to fans now. And it's probably not, given what clubs should be as well, I know it's something we've discussed a lot on the show, particularly in relation to, you know, issues like Saudi Arabia trying to buy Newcastle United. But clubs are social institutions in that way. So it means they do actually have a social responsibility beyond just playing football games and, you know, making fans happy. They have a role, and they have a huge power as well. They're probably too often, for kind of cop-out reasons really, goes untapped. But I mean, and now I think, as Jonathan also wrote in that piece, you could criticise some of the blandness of some of those statements. But there are a few clubs. Chelsea have actually been very proactive in the issues raising up the past few years, despite maybe perceptions given some of their history. But they've really been one of the most forthright and proactive Premier League clubs in that regard. They issued statements that were more nuanced and sophisticated and had more punch to them than a lot of the bland statements we've seen from others.
On the social media point and the players, and maybe this ties in with the clubs as well, who generally are tentative in this whole area, it would seem, looking at social media, it would seem, even looking at the mood across America, and we're trying to figure out why, of all the Black Deaths similar to that of George Floyd's, this one in particular has proved to capture the imagination and provoke such anger and such action. And perhaps one of the reasons, and this applies to football players as well, is that what happened to George Floyd was so clear and it was caught so vividly on video that it actually, if you're a player, for instance, and we'll talk about what happened in the Bundesliga, but if you're a player, it doesn't require much background reading. Like, I can understand how players might feel very apprehensive wading into the nuts and bolts of politics on a routine basis. But actually, given the nature of what happened, there is no background reading required. It is just so obviously horrific and wrong. Instant judgment. I mean, even in the States, there was no, well, let's wait and see what the autopsy says, or maybe it's not how it looked, or what happened before the video, or what happened after. You know, it's just so obvious to everybody, players included, that it's a cause they all feel instantly comfortable shouting about.
Yeah, and there's probably two sides to that as well. As you say, it's the unfortunate and tragic clarity to this, but also it's that clarity on the back of a lot of build-up and so many similar cases in the past didn't quite have this clarity. Well, this emphatically does. And I suppose as well, adding into that is the moment in time we're at. As you say, I mean, it's quite odd in that it's almost because the news cycle has been so singularly fixated on one issue, which is obviously coronavirus. It does mean that something as stark as this, its power is all the more distilled. And I think it has led to this. And I mean, I saw someone point out the other day, I mean, when it comes to something when even Michael Jordan, who's famously, of course, dodged such issues in the past, as was discussed on The Last Dance, but he actually released a statement on this. So, yeah, I mean, I know to say it transcends politics is obviously a bit of a cliche in these circumstances, but that very much feels the case here. And again, it comes back to what Kick It Out said, that it's just basically a very clear human and moral issue that makes it impossible certainly for clubs to avoid, and as on the other side is one that very much energises players.
So that has led to, for instance, Liverpool, the picture of them taking a knee. You mentioned various clubs releasing statements of some kind or other. And then in the Bundesliga over the weekend, Jadon Sancho pulled up a T-shirt saying justice for George Floyd. Hakimi and Weston McKennie as well staged protests of their own. And the question was going to be, how does football handle this? And Gianni Infantino has come out and said, for the avoidance of doubt, in a FIFA competition, the recent demonstrations of players in Bundesliga matches would deserve an applause and not a punishment. I did wonder how the Bundesliga would react. I did wonder how FIFA would react. Obviously, they have a blanket ban on political statements and have stuck to that fairly rigidly, with some exceptions, which we'll come to, not least the poppy. But of all the causes, given that they have thrown their weight behind racism in a very official way, this was never one where they could sanction the players. I mean, even if they wanted to now, they are fully backed into a corner. And I don't suspect they do want to. No,
completely, yeah. Now, it was impressively forthright from FIFA as well, maybe in a way that some people didn't expect, although I have seen some comments that, well, it's easy to say when we won't actually have a FIFA competition for a while, because these are all obviously under the jurisdiction of domestic bodies. Although ultimately FIFA dictates that, and I mean, to be fair, it is a very strong message that effectively corners authorities, and for them to go against that would be huge. The suggestions from Germany last night were that the players wouldn't be sanctioned, that there will be empty, and that should be the case, because even there's always been a bit of a problem with football. I did a piece on this morning for The Independent, but the game's authorities easy out has been, so they don't have to judge on these issues. That it's almost a blanket ban on political statements, but that's never really been true, because I mean, ultimately the very organisation is football. Politics are inherent to football. I know, again, that's a bit of a cliche to say, but it's true. The very organisation of the sport, the very organisation of 11 people getting together, it can be political. You can see that with Athletic Bilbao, given their policy of only signing Basque players in what's seen as kind of quite overt display of nationalism, or to another extreme, and something obviously far more, or something immoral, was apartheid South Africa, which led to a ban. So football has always actually allowed these distinctions when it's seen fit, and that, of course, came to a head two and a bit years ago when it looked like England were going to be sanctioned for wearing poppies in that match against Scotland in a friendly in around November 2017. And that did actually bring a change to the law to allow political statements like the poppy. So there is, I mean, despite the fact that there's always been this attempt to make it black and white, and basically just saying we can't sanction any political statement, that's never really been the case. And that was something that I suppose was solidified with that rule change. And it means that there should be more flexibility on issues like on protests about George Floyd. Yes.
And you did make the point as well, I think, in your piece, Miguel, that FIFA did ban apartheid South Africa.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, coming back to something and it shows how it's impossible to disentangle politics from football, because that was ultimately about the organisation of just 11 players.
It will all depend, I would imagine, on how things go in the States, and Donald Trump is doing his level best to inflame the whole thing yet further but we're, 2-3 weeks away from a resumption of football activities in the Premier League. I suspect things will have calmed down in the States, but frankly, who knows? I mean, things are just that surreal at the moment. We can anticipate, I would think, demonstrations of some kind from certain players, and the Premier League, we will just have to take a similar stance. The interesting point may arise when a more controversial stance is taken. I mean, how much leeway do we start giving players when it comes to other issues will be an interesting point down the line, because I do think players are becoming more active on this front. Yeah,
but that's the thing, and that's why there shouldn't be blanket banning. If these issues should be reviewed, and while you could fairly say, there's a fair argument to say political statements like, Pep Guardiola with the yellow ribbon say, that's the most famous recent example, that it's divisive enough, and there are sufficient politics around it that you can't warrant that. That isn't the case with something like this. And also, just as a bit of a tangent, and in relation to kind of the Premier League restarting, there is a little bit of an undercurrent here as well, in that I know the Premier League's BAME advisory group met on Friday in relation to a host of issues, and I think protests like this, I'm not 100% certain on that, but there were cases like racial abuse of players, and also I suppose the concerns about whether BAME players were going to be were disproportionately affected by coronavirus. But it was seen as a kind of a pretty robust but productive meeting. And so given the atmosphere from people I've spoken to, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see some sort of gesture when the Premier League comes back, still in relation to Floyd, even if it kind of calms down a little bit, I suppose, which we'd hope.
On Project Restart, and I look forward to when we don't have to talk about Project Restart ever again. The fixture list, I think I saw you tweet earlier on, the fixture list is due out sometime in the next 24 hours, give or take. There's a few final bits of the jigsaw they have to figure out, not least what TV companies get what.
Well, that was meant to be, yesterday I wrote that it was going to be 24 hours, and apparently it is agreed, but there are still a few minor issues to sort out, which means the full schedule probably won't be announced until next week. But I think they've got, from what I've heard, they've got most of the details sorted. And I think there's some expectation that the first Friday night game will be Spurs against Man United, which I suppose is the real kick-off of Project Restart, given the first two games are this kind of residual. It's quite weird to talk about in these terms, but they're games in hand before it evens out, I suppose, and they can kind of start from a level playing field, which is why the true start will be that weekend, and maybe Spurs against United. But yeah, the actual schedule probably won't be released now until early next week.
And things seem to be moving relatively seamlessly now. Like the testing results, the number of positive tests was pretty much in line with where the Bundesliga was, despite where the UK is at large compared to Germany. The TV companies seem relatively happy. Most of the players seem relatively happy. It's progressing. It looks like it's on track, and they'll get this thing done, barring some kind of second surge, obviously.
Yeah, and it's amazing given how smooth it feels now compared to how divisive and vociferous it was only 2 weeks ago. And I think it was really only 3 weeks ago when the whole thing looked under threat, and the Raleigh is the bottom six clubs were being jokingly referred to as Project Sabotage by figures of some of the other clubs. It seemed like there were obstacles at every turn, and all that has kind of melted away so easily. And now it's really more procedural issues, and even like from a journalistic perspective, those meetings were becoming like match fixtures almost. That the way we were building up to them, and there was so much on them. And now there's another meeting tomorrow, and it's kind of like say tonight I'm doing a small news piece on it rather than kind of really kind of feverishly kind of fishing around for details, because all they're going to discuss tomorrow is they're going to still talk about what stadiums they're going to play at. The rebate issue looks settled. That was going to be whether the clubs had to pay back the broadcasters for the season going overdue. And also they will discuss the curtailment plans, but that's only as a contingency now. Although someone did say to me today as well, it's also just maybe to keep minds a little fresh, because the Premier League hasn't actually kicked back off yet, and there is still some possibility that it could be curtailed. So I suppose it keeps everyone in check. And what is the story with stadiums? Are any games going to be home in teams' actual stadiums? Are they all neutral? No, it looks like they'll get their wish, and the vast majority of games will be home and away. But some high-risk game, and this is all subject to discussions with police, it's why I think it won't be sorted tomorrow. are not completely sorted, but potential high-risk games in terms of fans congregating. So Liverpool winning a title, or Newcastle's last game, which is another one today, if they are taken over by Saudi Arabia, which could bring congregation fans. I think they're more likely to be moved to neutral grounds. Of course, that raises all sorts of issues about suspicion against fans and all that. But it was interesting today that Jurgen Klopp, basically, he did an interview with the Anfield Rap podcast, explicitly with the message really telling fans to stay home, which is kind of telling in itself, I suppose. But either way, I'd imagine that 90% of these games, if maybe 100%, will be played in the stadiums they're supposed to take place in.
It's funny, the enduring image now of the Atletico-Liverpool game is Jurgen Klopp telling people to put their hands away as they put them out, and he was walking out of the tunnel that night.
Well, it's amazing even, because I was looking through some messages from that time as well. That's obviously the last game I went to, along with so many other people. Yeah. And even that week, Robert Peston was tweeting about how the government still were resistant to the idea of not allowing fans at the games because they didn't want a sense of panic. And it's amazing, A, how different that seems now, but even how much changed in the space of a few days after that match.
It's true. That was Cheltenham week as well. And actually, we had more of a go here at Cheltenham, certainly I did, than the Liverpool game, which in hindsight is bizarre given, 3,000 Spanish fans had travelled over. I mean, it was just as egregious. And the messaging from those who clearly know more about this thing than us in English life, in Westminster, the various experts they had parading out around that time were saying there is no issue here. There is no issue here. If you remember the Wales-Scotland Six Nations game due to go ahead on the Saturday after Cheltenham and after that Liverpool Atletico game, that was only called off on the Friday afternoon. But it was actually difficult because the advice from the authorities was so strongly to the effect that this is not an issue. These open air congregations are fine.
There's a really interesting thing there because it was similar with the Premier League, and we wrote at the time, and on reflection, actually, we may have had this the wrong way. We had our sports hats on. We should have had our political hats on. Like myself and Tony Evans had basically an exclusive about how the Premier League had been called direct from a Cobra meeting, saying that the government was, I think this was Friday afternoon, maybe it was a Thursday, but that the government was reassessing their idea on A, fixtures taking place, and B, fans being allowed into stadiums. And the feeling was they might have got it wrong, which is incredible to think about now again. And as you say, it was quite late in that. And I was at that Liverpool Atletico game, as I say, and I do remember kind of going up. It was only when I was on the train up that it kind of first kind of struck me, thinking, should I really be going to this? I mean, should this be should they be letting Madrid fans through? And even like from my own experience, what I can speak of, even in the press area, say, where you had kind of hundreds of Spanish media who would come from a city that had just been put on lockdown. Yeah,
and there was a brilliant piece in the Sunday Times. I think it was that Sunday. If not that Sunday, it was definitely the following Sunday, but it was in close proximity to that week. And it was around, I would say, the Friday, Saturday that Dominic Cummings, amongst others, had gone from herd immunity and, the leaked comments were, well, what if a few pensioners die? It's not the end of the world, to the Imperial College writing a paper, sitting down with Cummings and saying, you could lose X hundreds of thousands if you don't start acting differently. And then this, the scales fell from his eyes and suddenly he was advocating complete lockdown. So all of that was going on. You mentioned Klopp. It just all suddenly comes flooding back how horrific that week is in hindsight. And they pretty readily track deaths to those various sporting fixtures, which is... And
even during that game, as dramatic as that match was, I think it was during that game that one of the Juventus players had been announced that he had coronavirus, and it kind of just felt then. You could feel it, certainly in the press box, and I suppose people in the stadium might have known it as they were kind of fixated in the match. But you could feel a sense this could be the last match we watch for some time. Even the press conference afterwards, Diego Simeone was asked about whether coronavirus could affect things, and then of course it all accelerated so quickly.
Yes, Mikel Arteta and all that. You mentioned Newcastle, so I'm struggling to keep track what the latest is here. The human rights situation, despite your various excellent pieces to the effect that they should be talked about more, that's not really what the fit and proper person test, or whatever it's called these days, is about. In the main, it's about finances. So that seems to have been boxed away quite nicely. I hadn't thought that the piracy rights situation, i.e. Saudi effectively allowing beIN coverage be broadcast illegally across the country, might be the stickier point for the Premier League. I mean, I do check in at times on Richard Keys and Andy Gray, and Keys is banging this drum fairly relentlessly, the piracy rights situation. Is this going to hold anything up? Where is this whole deal? I haven't really looked into it much in the last week or so. Is it progressing slowly at all?
I still think there won't be anything for another 2 weeks. As regards to the kind of human rights thing, the ultimate issue there is that there's no morality clause anywhere in the owners and directors' house. I mean, the regulations are just about open enough to interpretation that you could enforce it, but that's unlikely to be the case given the possibility of so many legal challenges. Also, the Premier League clubs, or sorry, the shareholders, the owners, could vote on bringing in some morality clause, but that's probably unrealistic given ultimately most of them probably want the option to sell to the highest bidder. So, you know, it does indicate how warped the world of elite sport is, that human rights is basically trumped as an issue by intellectual property in this, but that is pretty much the case. But that could yet prove a sticking point. Right. So, obviously, I mean, the Premier League and Newcastle find themselves in the middle of what is an economic cold war between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which has, of course, led to the growth of this station, Be Out Q, which is basically, you know, the kind of crudest pirate undermining of the Qatari station, beIN Q, or beIN Sport, sorry. The Premier League of themselves they've exhausted every avenue trying to take action against this. You know, they've gone to the US government, the UK government, they've issued statements. They've tried to take action 9 times in Saudi Arabia, but tellingly couldn't get a firm to represent them in that case. So I think that has appeased a lot of broadcasters who the Premier League do have a strong relationship with. And it has, of course, led to this WTO report on BLQ, which has to come out in 2 weeks. And I think it won't be until after that this issue will be decided, because obviously if as everyone expects, the WTO rules that the Saudi Arabian state is behind BLQ, it would put any Premier League decision before then in a bit of a tricky position, because there's so much wrapped up in this. Because I mean, I was talking to someone involved this week for piece on that, and if you look at what the Premier League is, it has, beyond the football, the actual body of the Premier League is essentially, it's been stripped down from Richard Scudamore's time to essentially become just purely a right-selling business. And that's why it's so successful, why it's made so much money. But that is all it is. And that's been built on really strong relationships with broadcasters all over the world, and obviously kind of proven really strong in issues like protecting copyright, you know, shutting down streams, all the rest of it. And for the sanction of a deal to go through, where a state has been behind this pirate station, basically, it would cause a lot of problems. And you know, there's been talking about potential breaches of trust. It would change not breaches of trust, but it would change relationships, and potentially, as much as anything, just maybe lessen the value of rights in future. So it does cause complications, and gives. So someone put it to me. Basically, given the Premier League, it would have been the biggest headache they've ever had it not been for COVID-19. But that is the height of it, and the decision on this could well dictate the next few years and the potential expansion of the Premier League, given how key international rights are to what they do and how successful they've been. Okay,
very interesting. It's turned into a bit of a saga. To finish on a lighter note, I saw you tweet today. It got me feeling a bit nostalgic. 23 years ago to the day since the Roberto Carlos free kick. That was at Le Tournoi, wasn't it? It's hard. It's amazing how quickly you can sound so of a previous generation. But I remember, I didn't have the channels, you obviously did, but I remember reading about it, hearing about it, then seeing pictures of it, and it must have been some months later before I actually saw it. Regardless, it stands the test of time. That is, without getting to the nuts and bolts of ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, that remains arguably the greatest free kick ever captured.
Yeah, and one of the most spectacular football moments, just for its originality and audacity. We didn't have the channel at the time, but we did have Sky News. I remember someone put it to me today about that on Twitter, that what was so great about the moment as well is that to see players like that and to see countries like Brazil at that time was actually pretty rare. Yeah. You didn't just have it on your fingertips as you do today. So I do remember, like, Sky News used to always have the sports news at 20 past the hour. And I remember that day basically going on making every single hour to make sure I saw that free kick again, because it was just so ridiculous.
So ridiculous. So ridiculous. Listen, great to catch up. Is that, by the way, have you accidentally left some kind of exercise/medicine ball in the background? Is this a Ron Burgundy? Oh no, you've caught me doing my weights.
It's not used that much. I should have put my Kindle behind.
Yeah. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent. Thanks, Miguel. Talk to you soon. Take it easy.
Thank you. Cheers.
Now you're welcome back. So let's go to Italy and Paddy Agnew, who is standing by. Evening, Paddy. How you doing?
Good evening, Joe. I'm fine. How are you?
Great. Last time we spoke, you were right in the teeth of this whole thing, around the peak or approaching the peak or maybe just after the peak, and it was all incredibly scary. It does seem, certainly from afar, like you're out the other end of it now in so much as any country is.
Yeah. I think you can say that. I mean, we had 55 deaths yesterday. 55 deaths yesterday in a country where we had, for a serious period, we had about 1,000 every day. So, yes, all the figures look good at the moment. Deaths are going down, new contagions going down, people being cured, numbers going up. And it's certainly encouraging the Italian government and indeed the Italian Football Federation to say, now's the time, lads, we've got to put our foot back in the water and get the show on the road again.
Good to hear. 33,000 deaths later, it is quite extraordinary. So to what extent has daily life changed then?
Well, daily life under the lockdown was obviously greatly changed. Italians behaved pretty well under the lockdown. They took the instructions not to be out and about very seriously. So, I mean, for a long period, apart from post office, banks, news agents, there was nothing open. There was nowhere to go and nothing to do, and nobody went anywhere.
Yes, and sorry, I probably phrased that clunkily. To what extent has it changed since lockdown? Are you now allowed to move around freely?
Yeah, it's entirely it's changing slowly, but it's certainly all sorts of handbrakes have been released. I mean, just for example, today we had the Vatican Museum, we had the Tower of Pisa, we had the Colosseum, we had the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, things like that opened up for the first time since the lockdown was put in place at the beginning of March.
Okay.
And then otherwise we have things like, apart from, it's not just supermarkets, but all sorts of other shops have opened up.
And on the footballing front then, Coppa Italia will kick off June 13th and then Serie A resumes on June the 20th after 3 months. Is this a generally celebrated, popular decision? Everybody's happy for the football to get back underway?
Well, as you can imagine, Joe, the football club presidents, the club owners, argued a great deal about it. There were a lot of them who weren't happy about a restart at all because of the damage it might, because of the health risk, and because they thought it would just be safer to be cautious. And then you had people like Lotito, the owner of Lazio, who Claudio Lotito, very keen to get back into action because, of course, Lazio have been prior to the shutdown, they've been having their best season for years. And when it restarts on June 20th, it starts with Juventus, the champions, 1 point clear of Lazio. And then Inter are Inter? They're about another 8 points away in third, and Atalanta 15 points away in fourth.
I saw the league is going to resume with a match day every 3 days until August the 2nd. They want to get 124 games played across the 44 days. So that's a tight schedule, match every 3 days. I also read all matches will be played in 3 different time slots to avoid the summer heat. But then I saw the kickoff times were 11:15 a.m, 1:30 p.m. and 3:45 p.m. I mean, I couldn't think of worse times for is that not the hottest part of the day?
No, I think you've got that one. I think I don't know where you got those.
Okay,
the kickoff times. The kickoff times are a small number of the games are at a quarter past 5. The vast majority of the games are either at 6:30 or a quarter to 10.
Okay. Do you know what? I was looking at an American website. That makes a lot more sense. I was thinking only dogs and mad Englishmen at that time of the day. That's fine. Okay, so evening kickoffs. I saw some presidents as well. Juventus's president, they're floating the kite of maybe even 20%. Full stadiums. Yes. Is that a runner? Because, I mean, that is the next frontier for all professional sport.
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's not a runner yet, obviously, but they've floated that kite, yeah. And you'd be talking about something like, 10,000 people at the San Siro or 4,000 people at the Juventus Stadium. Depends on the size of the stadium, but the percentage would be about 10% of its capacity, yeah. And they'll be pushing that very hard if everything goes to plan. But it's a big gamble. It's a gamble that every country's taking, not just in football, but in terms of their national economies. Do you if you don't start up soon, you're going to do huge damage to the national economy. So you've got to start up soon, and that's what the football presidents say. But they therefore, in that context, they're going to be pushing very quickly and very hard to get fans in again as well.
And how much TV money is swirling around Italian football? Obviously, Premier League can coast off into the sunset with TV money, and it's not a problem. They don't need fans for a very long time. Where is Italian football when it comes to TV money and how reliant it is on gate receipts?
No, it's still far too reliant on TV rights. There's no question of that. And they're in a major row at the moment with Sky Italia because Sky Italia are saying, well, okay, we'll pick up where we left off, but you can't expect the same money because you've completely, we haven't had games for the last 3 months. So we're going to have to come up with a new deal, and they haven't come up with that new deal yet. And there's going to be some very hard negotiation down the line.
Okay.
Down that very short line, I would think.
Okay. And let's assume that the negotiation, they find something that they can both accommodate.
They
yeah. So.
Yeah, of course they will. Yeah.
But is there enough money from TV companies given to Italian clubs that they don't actually need fans in stadiums, or do they really need those gate receipts? Because the Premier League clubs don't really need the gate receipts; they can survive on the TV money. I don't know. Is it the same in Italy?
It is. It's not quite as they don't get as much from TV as the Premier League does, but they can survive. But they don't want to.
Yeah. What about the players and all this? Are they generally happy to come back? Have there been any dissenters?
I know there've been one or two of the players have been, very dubious about it, and they've been saying what you'd expect them to say. We'll have to wait and see, and are all the health requirements being observed? And the Football Federation produced its. I'm sure the English FA did the same. It produced its handbook for how to deal with football games in the age of COVID. It's about a 37-page document. When the footballers looked at that, they sort of, I think it basically reassured most of them that serious steps were being taken. It's all about limiting the number of people at the grounds to 300 on a match day, timing the arrivals of the visiting team, timing the arrival of the referees, working, having everything has to be sanitized, obviously, and you have to have disinfectant all over the place, and you have to have a one-way traffic system. So, you walk into a place down one corridor and you walk out another corridor, all that sort of stuff, and it's all drawn up and for the players to look at, and they can see, even things of how the dressing rooms are going to be set up. And I think all of that has encouraged them, has reassured them more than encouraged them.
Yes, I think all of us at the moment are relatively encouraged. It's just the worry of a second surge, which is unthinkable right now, but a distinct possibility, and that brings the
second surge here would stop the season.
Sure, I mean, as it would everywhere, really.
Because you're saying, you point out the number of games, but the reality about the games between let me just check now if I got the figures right, between June 20th and July 23rd, they'll be playing every day except for 5 days. There's about 33 days, and only 5 of them there isn't a match.
Right.
So if something goes wrong, and that cramped schedule is interrupted, they'll just have to stop, and it'll be a case of either deciding who's the winner by computer or deciding by some sort of playoff.
What did you say again? Who's top of the table and by what?
Juventus are 1 point clear of Lazio.
Okay.
Then 8 points further back are Inter, and then 15 points behind Juventus. In fourth place are Atalanta.
Is there a feeling Lazio can catch Juventus?
Well, I mean, it certainly was Claudio Lotito, the Lazio owner's idea, was that he was of all the Italian club owners, he was the one keenest to get back into action, because it's been their best season for a long time. If you look at what's happening in the COVID situation, one of the advantages that Lazio had before was that they're out of European competition. They're out of the Italian Cup, and therefore they're only playing once a week. But with the new cramped schedule, they'll lose that advantage, and they'll be playing 2 or 3 times a week like everybody else. On the other hand, they've got one advantage from the fact that all these games are behind closed doors. Means that, like, they have 3 really difficult away games will be against Napoli, Atalanta, and Juventus, which are all 3 places that are really hard to play for the away team. And they don't have to worry about the home crowd.
Yeah, which, as we've seen in the Bundesliga, is making an unbelievably big difference. It's quite incredible. I mean, it's what we all suspected, but it is still just, it's so jarring for all the advances in sports science and preparation and professionalism. It turns out tens of thousands of people cheering you on, and maybe affecting the referee too, I'm sure, is so decisive.
I don't think he's much doubt about that, Joe. 'Twas ever thus.
By the way, settle something for me before you go, because we were talking to Filippo Clare. This is a total tangent, and that's great that Italian football is back and moving again, like the country. We were talking to Filippo Clare yesterday about Paul Pogba and the differing perceptions of Pogba in the UK as opposed to France. And in France, they look at Pogba's performances for France in the World Cup, on the way to winning the World Cup, and that is what looms large now. Whereas in the UK, you have pundit after pundit saying he hasn't really done it at United, and he's not Roy Keane, and he doesn't dig in, and all this kind of stuff. His period at Juventus is often dismissed away as, well, look, Pirlo ran the show and Pogba was just, floating in and out and not doing too much. You would have seen him a lot at Juventus, I'm sure, in that period. How good was he, Paddy? Maybe we don't quite give him the credit for how he played at Juve.
Well, I thought he was fantastic. I thought he was absolutely fantastic that year. Some of the best football he's ever played. I've never understood. I don't follow, I have to confess this, I don't follow the Premiership very closely, like all of you guys have to. I just haven't time to do that. But so I haven't seen how underperformed he has been for Man United. But for Juventus, he was a very young player when he went there. Remember, we all know the story. They snatched him away from United, and he really he looked from day one. He looked a huge potential, and he scored lots of important goals in key matches. The sort of things that player that really define a player. And all the Juventus fans were most unhappy when they sold him.
Okay. Paddy, always a pleasure. Great to hear things are improving there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.